the world is burning down. The changes on the planet, they're not coming, they're here. The old world is failing. Banking systems are failing. The old political structures are failing. Why? Because they cannot literally sustain the frequencies of the higher frequencies coming to the planet. We're having a divergence in frequencies. The sleepwalkers, they're in the noise, and they're making the most amount of noise on either side of the aisle. They're completely asleep. They're fighting for human ego. For the light workers, silence is sacred. Raise your frequency. We're all on the planet together. We all breathe the same air. Which part of humanity will you fracture into? You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This episode is titled, Which Part of Humanity Will You Fracture Into? Now, I'm not sure. Have you looked outside your window? Have you looked out in the world and have you watched any of the news? Personally, I don't watch a lot of news this day and age. But what I do know through direct observation, all you've got to do is open your eyes and look around. I'm in the United States and we're seeing a heavy dose of this right now. The fracturing of humanity. One part is working from love and light and expansion and consciousness, and the other part, the fractured part of humanity, is working from darkness and ego and greed and fear. And we've got divergent humanities. The fact that you're listening to this podcast would probably tell me that you're working from the spiritual essence and the spiritual being of you. But I want to talk about what the other side looks like and how to continue raising your frequency. Keep listening. Okay, so there's a shift happening on the planet right now. Don Javier has talked to me, and I'm not exaggerating, about this literally since the 1990s. And I remember in the 1990s listening to him one day going, well, yeah, but I don't see any of this. I mean, I don't see it going on outside. Everything, air quote, looks okay. And now I look at it, and it's very obvious we are in it. We are in a divergence in the United States, but it's not just in the United States. It's many places in the world. We've seen this in Australia the last couple of years. We've seen it in Venezuela for the last several years. We've seen it happening in Italy recently. We've seen it happening in France recently. Don Juan, many years ago, said to me, and I'm going to use the word hope. I hope we don't find this to be true. But he said this in the 90s, he said, one day you guys are going to be fighting for a handful of beans. Now, he was Mexican and he ate beans, so he meant that, as valuable things. But he said, one day you're going to be fighting for a handful of beans. It was a general comment. Basically, it was a metaphor to say, hey, wake up. Things are happening on the planet. If you've listened for any amount of time, you've heard me talking to a good friend of mine, Gary Zukav. And Gary is very much adamant about the shifts that are happening on the planet right now. As a matter of fact, his last book that just came out, and he has another one coming out soon, his last book is called The Universal Human, where he talks about what I'm talking about right now, how we are all universal. But many people are operating from the small part of ourselves, the human identity, and that's changing. Things are changing very, very quickly. A conversation I was having with Gary, he said to me, and Don Javier said the same thing, and they don't know each other, by the way. Gary knows who Don Javier is, and Don Javier knows of Gary because I've told him, but that's about it. But they've said the same thing. They both have said, we are in it. The shift and the changes are happening. They're not coming. They're not about to happen. They are happening now. So look around. What is happening in the world? What is happening in the United States? And of course, I'm more familiar with that because I live in the United States. But look at what's happening. The economic collapse. The United States economy is trembling. I would say it's an old metaphor that I've heard, and I really don't like the word fat lady, but that's the way I heard the metaphor, is the U.S. economy is like a card table, that little rickety table you play cards on with the fat lady dancing on it. But you look at the United States economy, you look at politics in the US, we are more divided now than what we have ever been in the nation, except perhaps during the Civil War. And even people in the US now are talking about a potential US Civil War. It's crazy the things that are happening and the socialization and society and things that are happening. We literally are polarized into two camps in the United States, Camp A and Camp B. But what I look at and what I want to talk about is not politics, but I want to talk about which camp are you in, which is why I ask you in the headline, which part of humanity will you fracture into? Because the world is fracturing, and which direction are you going to fracture? I remember at dinner a couple of years ago with Don Javier, and he said, the phrase was just such a powerful sentence. It was just so poignant to me. But he said, the world is burning down. When you think about it, that can ignite, it can elicit a little bit of fear. It didn't in me at that point because I think a bigger frame that I work from, a bigger context that I work from is everything's always going to be okay. I might not like what's happening right now, but what I know is that everything is always going to be okay. So right now, as I said, Don Javier's talked to me about this for 20 years, and I was never a naysayer. I was never a doubting Thomas. Many years ago, I was kind of along the lines of, well, okay, let's see what happens. I don't see anything right now, dude, but let's see what happens. And Don Javier was saying, and I don't need him to tell me this because I can see it. And even Gary was saying the same thing when we had a phone call recently. The changes on the planet, they're not coming, they're here. We are in the middle of these changes. And it'll take about 20 more years. And the next generation after that will be a completely different model of humanity, a completely different generation. Why? Because, see, we think about evolution. But when we think about evolution, we don't think about it in macro terms. We think about it in micro terms. So, for example, we might think about the evolution of ourself, but what about the evolution of the species? What about the conscious evolution of the species, which is exactly what we're in the midst of right now? And as I said earlier, you look around the US, we're in the middle of this. I mean, it's not a cakewalk in the United States. Now, what I do want to point out is I live in, a really small town. We're out of the way. I'm out of the way in this town, and I'm out of the way in the town that I live in my own little world, a couple of acres of land. I overlook the town that I live in from the top of a mountain. I literally am out of the way, and I do my best to stay out of it. But there's so much polarization going on in the world. Now, where I live, I don't see a lot of it per se in my everyday life because I live in, if you Google Sedona, Arizona, and like if you Google, most spiritual small towns in the United States, Sedona is usually number one on pretty much every list, and if not in the top two or three of every single list, and even places in the world. So the population that lives here is very much along the lines of peace, love, live and let live, and love to grow and evolve spiritually. And I would assume that a lot of people who come to visit are here for the scenery, number one. It is very beautiful, but they also are attracted to the energy here. It's a very different place. But if you look out in the general world here in the United States, look what's happening at the riots in Los Angeles right now. Then look what Donald Trump has done. He has literally federalized state troops. As I understand, that's illegal to do. A governor has to request that, which was not done, which is the federal government exercising more of its authoritarianism over a state government. So we're seeing these things creating, all this control, all this fear. But I look deeper, I see what's happening. And a little later, I'll talk about the difference between looking and seeing, but I see what's happening. Many people just look at what's happening. So the two worlds, one is of love and higher frequency and consciousness. One is of fear. I think I said fear and love in the same sentence a bit ago. They're not coupled. Sorry about that. So the worlds are the one of love and higher frequency and vibration, and the one of fear and all the lower frequencies associated with that. And I think the number one thing that Don Javier has always said in all the years that I've worked with him, one sentence, and it's almost like a broken record. Raise your frequency, raise your frequency, raise your frequency, raise your frequency. And by the way, I'll talk about that later in the episode about how to do that. But it's all about raising your frequency. And many years ago, Don Juan told us in a channeling the way to make yourself immune to what's happening on the planet is to raise your frequency. I'm not going to go into it in this episode, but you might wonder, well, how is raising my frequency going to make me immune to the chaos happening on the planet? Well, if you look at the double slit experiment, which is an experiment in physics, what that basically demonstrates is that we create our own realities based upon where we're holding our attention and our observation. And so if we raise our frequency, then where is our attention? And then therefore, what are our observations, meaning what is our experience of life going to be? And many people think what's happening right now, they think it's about nations and regions and economies and politics and socialization and all external outer realities. It is not. It is not at all. It's about souls. It's about inner realities. And we have to look at, where am I living from? Am I living from the lower function of me, which is the human 3D ego, or am I working from the higher function of me, which is my soul? Am I seeing how much money that I can make every year, or am I doing my best to work to know myself as soul? And by the way, there's nothing wrong, and I've done it before, there's nothing wrong with making a lot of money. What matters is who you're being and what you do with the money and the experiences you create for other people with that money, because money is meant to be shared. So the question is which side of human evolution are you currently on? Are you in the awakened or are you in the lost? Now, I do want to say, asking that question, the fact that you're here, I know my demographic. And candidly, I never thought, I didn't know when I started the podcast. And actually, my team kept prompting me in 2019, 2020, whatever it was, Jim, start the podcast, start the podcast, like, I don't want to do a podcast. And today, we've done something pretty amazing because of you. We have right at 6 million downloads, I believe. I mean, that's phenomenal. We're in the top 1/10 of 1% of podcasts in the world. We're top 100 in 2 categories on iTunes and a top downloaded podcast on Spotify. And I could say it all happened by accident, but it did not. It happened because I was speaking my truth. And what I didn't know back then is it was resonating with people, because you listening right now, if I had to guess, you are either on a spiritual path or you're very open-minded to a spiritual path. And I know my tribe, I know my demographic. They are what I call, in a joking way, because I'm one of them, the weirdos. They're the ones that are sitting outside looking for the UFOs and Reiki and healing and all these kind of things, all things that, a lot of it can be scientifically validated. But the point is, we are all, for the most part, seekers and evolvers, and we are growing into higher versions of ourselves. But what I wanted to do in this episode is talk about navigating what's happening in the world based upon the path that you're on and observing the other path of those people that are staying asleep. Nostradamus once said, and I want to talk about Nostradamus a few times in this episode, not because Don Javier has talked to me quite a bit over the years about Nostradamus. And off topic, I remember back in 2004 or so, and I say the year because I'm just recounting back, I'm trying to think back, and for some reason my mind just holds dates and they just pop out of my mouth before I even think about it. But we were having dinner and I was talking about Nostradamus or something. I said, or Don Javier said, that's not it. I'm like, how do you know that's not it? And he said, because Nostradamus told me. And I was like, okay. And he goes, I don't recall the exact words, but something along the lines of, I've had the ability to communicate with Nostradamus for some time. But back to Nostradamus. He said, the great multitude will awaken, one to light and one to blackened waters. Some will rise above the veil of what many people are trapped in, and they will live in peace and love and higher frequency. But most people, and here's where it pertains to you outside of the theoretical, most people drown and distractions of the 3D ego world, lower frequency. And we drown in the ego of the 3D world by the news, by Instagram, by social media. I don't recall if I said it last week or not. I think I did on the podcast. Don Javier rarely says anything derogatory, judgmental, critical. He just doesn't do it. I never hear it from him. But he had some extraordinarily not positive words to describe Mark Zuckerberg and what Zuckerberg's social media is doing to planetary consciousness. Let me put it that way. We're in a change right now. It's not, as I said earlier, it's not coming. We are in the middle of it right now. And we have to look at, well, which direction am I going, metaphorically speaking? Am I going left, the way of density, or am I going right, the way of evolution and higher consciousness? So many people that are lost and the ones that are going left, they literally double down on the externals. They double down on the illusion of safety. Let me hoard money. Let me do this. Let me do that. Let me, hop in bed, cover my head with the covers, and let me stay in fear. Let me live my life in fear. I don't get into that. Now, I will say in complete transparency, I am aware of how I'm thinking and how I'm choosing. And I can also say, I think it could be easy for anyone to fall into the fear of what's going on, but I choose not to do that. As a matter of fact, about 6 months ago, and we spent 6 months building it, I moved all of my training programs, the transformational coaching program and others, all from Facebook. And we now have an app, and I check everything in the app, and I communicate, all communication is in the app. I went to Facebook about 2 days ago because I saw some college friends this past weekend, and I knew they were going to be posting pictures on Facebook, and I wanted some of the pictures. And I was so relieved I don't go into Facebook anymore because the toxicity, you almost can viscerally smell it. It's very palpable. The toxicity and the fear and the stone hurling and the lower frequency consciousness on Facebook is, to me, mind numbing. So you have to look at, are you going to go to the mind numbing world of distraction and social media and news and fear, or are you going to go to the internal? Now, this being said, there's two camps of humanity, depending upon which world they're going into. Nostradamus called them the first world, those going into the fear and doubling down on the fear and the 3D ego. He called them the sleepwalkers. And he called the awakened ones, the ones that are evolving and growing their consciousness, he called them the sentinels. So, by the way, a sentinel is one who keeps guard. And I want to talk to you about that in a little bit because it's no accident that you found my podcast. It's no accident you've been listening for any amount of time. You were brought here for one reason only. You were attracted here for one reason only. That reason, which I will talk about this later, is frequency. Like frequency attracts like frequency. Now, as I was saying a bit ago, I would assume the reason you're listening, because even if you don't recognize yourself as that, you recognize some resemblance of it. You're a light worker. You're a healer. You're awake. This past weekend that I went to, it was friends from college, and we were all fraternity brothers in college. And my fraternity little brother, his name is Jay. I was very close to him in college, and I've always been very emotionally close to Jay. I always resonated with Jay. We talk now, and we talk in ways that a lot of people can't follow. And actually, he was the one hosting the weekend gathering at his lake house. He does very well financially at his lake house outside of Austin, Texas. And I stayed in the primary bedroom with he. There was like 14 of us, so we had to kind of pack into a 3-level townhome on the water. And I stayed in his bedroom, and on his nightstand, he had a book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And it was really interesting that I saw that because I'm like, yeah, I've always known that Jay is always on a path of 3D learning and growing, but also on a path of awakening. And if he were not awakening, he would not be reading that book. I would assume many of you listening now probably read that book or listened to some audios or something on that ancient piece of work. So I know that you listening, and if you're not, you don't identify with that, that's okay. But simply keep listening because shit's hitting the fan. Bottom line, shit is hitting the fan in the world, and you want to be able to better manage it to keep yourself as safe as you possibly can. But right now, if you look around, we're seeing shifts all around the world, as I said earlier, economically, politically, socially. And when it comes to the US government, currently, and what's happening in the US government, because the current US president is dismantling the the apparatuses and the structure of the US government. And I can say that with a high degree of certainty because I was a political science and psychology major in college. So I have a fair understanding of politics. Hell, I studied it every day for 4 years. But there's a Harvard professor, Professor Levitsky, and he says what we are evolving into is what's called competitive authoritarianism, which, by the way, is the exact system that exists in Venezuela right now and a few other countries. And long story very short, the country still has elections and etc. But the party in power literally does everything to sabotage the other party. Now, when I look at this, I'll talk about a bigger perspective in just a moment. When I look at this, to me, and I'm only using my words, it's sheer lack of awareness and stupidity to do that, meaning to leverage yourself against the other side. Now, at a 3D ego level, we think, oh, that makes perfect sense. I'm taking care of me and my kind. But the way that I look at it, I remember many years ago, I heard this quote by, and this is 25 years ago, Dr. Wayne Dyer. And Wayne said that a tree doesn't set its branches on the other side of the tree on fire. Meaning, if you're a tree and you're on the south side of the tree, you don't set the north side of the tree on fire because you're burning down the entire tree. Well, that's what those sleepwalkers are doing. They're burning down the entire tree. And even if they do successfully burn down a part of the tree, guess what they can't escape? They can't escape the evolution of consciousness on the planet because we are moving to a higher frequency species. So their ego might be telling them, okay, yeah, we have to win on our side, whether it be make America great again or whatever, or the other side. I have to be fair here. Whichever side you're on, I'm just going to tell you, you can take it or leave it. You can tell me to go to hell. But to pick either side per se and dig in is a lack of awareness. Why? Because if you're digging in on one side, you're burning down the other side of the tree. That reminds me of a conversation I was having with a good friend of mine many, many years ago as well. We're still friends today. We work together. I've helped him do quite a few things. His name is Akio Matsumura. He is a global thought leader. He is the first person in the world to bring together he brought together 6 times 1,000 world leaders, the Dalai Lama, cardinals, bishops, U.S. senators, Mother Teresa, Carl Sagan, Gandhi's grandkids. I mean, Akio, I know him today. As I said, we've been friends for many years. He is friends and has been friends with all of these people on the planet. And I used to work with him. And one day, he was sitting in my living room in Dallas, Texas. And I said, just very casually like this, in this tone of voice, I'm like, hey, Akio, how did you get Rabin and Arafat to sit down in Jericho in 1997? Because he's the first person in the world that got Rabin and Arafat to sit down. And he said, it was just so simple when it flowed out of his mouth. He said, oh, that's easy. When you can see the world from another person's perspective, you can get them to do anything. And Akio was able to see the world from Rabin's perspective and from Arafat's perspective. And he got him to start talking. I look at the MAGA movement in the United States, and I personally would be what John Payne called a citizen of the world. John Payne was a philosopher back in I believe, the 1800s. I'm a citizen of the world. I have brothers and sisters in Venezuela and Australia and Europe and North America and South America and Australia. I'm living the human experience. That's just me. We all have to, make our choices that we feel are appropriate for us. But here's what I know. If I don't agree with another side, then it's not my place to tear that side down. It's my responsibility to seek to understand. We're all on the planet together. We all breathe the same air. We all, to a large degree, drink the same water. This is our home that we live on, and the majority of the planet shits in their living room and dumps toxic waste in their living room as a metaphor, and then wonders why it's dangerous. Well, they do that because of a lack of personal evolution. Now, let's start talking about some solutions here. I'm going to tell you what keeps me sane in the world that we're living in, and it has for many years. Don Juan once said to me, the ordinary person hooks to other people. The spiritual warrior hooks to infinity. So my attention is on hooking to infinity, hooking onto the infiniteness of me, hooking on to divine mind, hooking on to higher mind, hooking on to higher aspects of me in human evolution. And I would think many of you listening can probably relate to that to some degree, whether it be a large degree or a small degree. Now, what's happening in the world? So most people, they can't see what's happening in the world. They look at the world and they either like it, and we look with our eyes. They look and they like it, or they don't like it. But what they can't do, they can't see. Seeing and looking are two very different things. Looking is looking through the filter of your beliefs and your indoctrination and looking at the world. And I see these, I look at these things and I see these things happening physically, and I'm basing my reality upon that. Seeing, metaphorically speaking, is pulling back the veil and looking behind and seeing behind what you're looking at, seeing the truth of what's really happening. So to look is physical. To see, again, goes beyond the belief and the indoctrinations and the filters that we've learned to believe apply to us. So let's go back to Nostradamus a little bit. The Sentinels. I would guess, I would bet money that you listening right now probably resonate with being a Sentinel, meaning if you're like a lot of people. Now, of course, I don't know. We've got 6 million downloads. I personally don't know many people who listen, and I'm very grateful for you listening. Seriously, from the heart, thank you. I'm very blessed to be able to serve. But what I do know is the amount of people that come into TCP, the Transformational Coaching Program. It's such a high frequency program. People in that program have said, I've never been in a community like this anywhere, ever. And I'm 50 years old and been through many programs, and I've never been anywhere like here. Why? Because like I said earlier, I tend to attract people that are operating from a higher frequency. But the Sentinels, they can sense that something is off. Even if they don't know what it is, it's kind of like an unsettling. Something is off. So right now, I don't mean later, I mean now. Now is a time of awakening. Now is time to raise your frequency and vibration. I think I said earlier, and I do so much audio and video that it runs together. I think I said earlier though, that Don Javier has said over the years, I mean, if I had $1 for every time I heard this, I'd be richer than Billy Graham or Bill Gates. If you don't know how Billy Graham is, it's a joke in America that many times preachers are very wealthy. I'd be very wealthy. But I don't know how many thousands of times I've heard the phrase, not to me, I mean, yes, to me individually, but to the group of us, raise your frequency, raise your frequency, raise your frequency, raise your frequency. And then many people that overthink try to make it very difficult. And they say, well, how do I raise my frequency? It's literally a matter of being. Because see, we go from thoughts, feelings, vibration, and frequency. Thoughts, feeling, vibration, frequency. So whatever you're thinking, I hate this. I hate Donald Trump. I hate Joe Biden. I hate Putin. I hate my neighbor. Whatever it is for you, or the reverse, even loving, and whoever you're loving, we go from thoughts, and then the thoughts create feelings, how we feel about whatever it is we have our attention on. And by the way, all ancient wisdom has said that all manifestation doesn't come through the thoughts, it comes through the feelings. So we go from thoughts to feelings to vibration to frequency. And Don Javier's always said, be in peace, go inside, be in love, be in joy, be in happiness all the time. And I recognized many years ago that that's easy to do unless I'm living from the outside world. And if I'm living from the outside world, then it's very hard. I mean, if I'm living on the external outside world, looking at what's happening in the US and all these kind of things, trust me, if I'm living in that world, I am like afraid and nervous and all these kind of things, but I'm not, because I'm working from how much peace can I have in me and how much peace can I bring? How much love can I have in me and how much love can I bring? And the same thing with joy and happiness. David Hawkins, he was a spiritual writer for the US in many years. I didn't know this. Actually, my acupuncturist told me this. He used to work on David Hawkins. Hawkins used to live here in Sedona. But Hawkins created a map of consciousness where he said there were 17 levels of consciousness. The lowest frequency being shame and the highest frequency being vibration. Now, in all candidness, I've never read any of David Hawkins' work. What I'm sharing with you, I found it online many years ago. I don't know, I can't vouch for the scientific accuracy of that. The working of Don Javier, there's no question. He's constantly talked many years about raise the frequency. And the way to do that is to manage your emotions. I'll say it again. To raise the frequency, manage the emotions. And Don Javier has constantly said the reverse. Stay out of the lower frequency emotions. The lowest is shame. Shame, and big ones for people are shame, self-pity, and a biggie for a lot of people is anger. Anger is a very low frequency emotion. But also, I'm not good enough. People aren't going to like me. And all these kind of things that we get into, we feel bad about. The negativity are all lower frequency emotions. These emotions pull us back into the world of these sleepwalkers, which is not where I'm guessing you want to be. Those that are asleep, the sleepwalkers, what they're experiencing, look at it. They're experiencing the extreme amount of fear and the information overload and the mental overload. And then look what happens. As a coping mechanism, they double down on fighting the other side. It's like going to the other side of the tree and not just lighting it on fire, but dousing it in gasoline and lighting it on fire. And they do all of this out of a lack of personal evolution and personal awareness. So you've got to think about, I always say, be to have. You must be before you can do, before you can have. How am I being? Right now also, Nostradamus said back in the quatrains, back in the 1500s, the quatrains are the chapters of his work, and he has 92 quatrains. Back in the quatrains, he says that one day people will speak with metal tongues. And what scholastics / scholars believe that means, metal tongues are technology. Now, look at the world and look how people can abuse technology to destroy other people, to tear people down, to tear down governments, to rig elections, all these kind of things. It's all the metal tongues. So right now we're seeing a split in humanity. It's not ideological. It's not cultural. It's not socioeconomic, even though it, air quote, looks like that. If you look at it, that's what it looks like. If you see it, it looks vibrational. We're having a divergence in frequencies. So for the sleepwalkers, they're in the noise and they're making the most amount of noise on either side of the aisle. They're completely asleep. They're fighting for human ego. For the light workers, silence is sacred. For the light workers, silence is sacred. The others, they're lost in social media. They're lost in the news. They're lost in fear, and they're lost in scarcity. And if I had to guess, it's not where you want to find yourself. So according to Nostradamus, we are in what he called an inversion ritual right now. And inversion ritual is when it's a battle between good and evil, truth and lie, light and darkness. And Nostradamus said that the beast, he called it the beast, wears robes of virtue, and the wise shall be ignored. Think about that. The beast wears robes of virtue, and the wise shall be ignored. And he said that inversion is complete when society rewards the liars and deceivers and punishes the truth tellers. I'll say that again. According to Nostradamus, the inversion is complete when society rewards the liars and deceivers and punishes the truth tellers. And if you don't think we're living in a world of leadership that lies constantly, I mean, lies a shocking amount, you may want to do a little more neutral party research to see what's really happening in the world, because we are being lied to in the US from our government and from our government leadership. So many people that are empaths, they can feel this, and many possibly can feel a little bit lost. But speaking of lost, Nostradamus also said those that are lost will drink from a poison well and they'll relish the taste. So when I look at this, we're in a divergence right now, as he called it. And what I look at is which way are we going to go? Now, let's introduce the children. Many years ago, Don Javier told me about the evolution of humanity on the planet. And he said, my generation, his generation, he said, didn't come with any spiritual awakening. He's 73 years old. And he goes, anyone in his generation that's spiritually awakening, they're doing it by conscious choice. And then he said, my generation, I don't know what, Generation X, I'm 1965. Last year, baby boomers was 1964, I'm 1965. In my generation, what started coming was the indigo children, children of the light. And they were named the indigo children. They were just different. And then what started coming in the 80s was what Don Javier called the crystalline kids, higher functioning beings. And a way to put this that will make it really easy to understand. Let's say that people that are in their 60s and 70s, let's go to Windows for a moment. Even though I use Apple, let's go to Windows. So I don't even know what Windows level we're on, but let's go back to Windows level 8. So those that were born that are 60 and 70 years old, in their 60s and 70s, they are Windows version 8. And then my generation, the Indigo kids, are Windows version 9. And now the sentient kids, the crystalline kids, are Microsoft version 10 operating system. Different operating systems, 8, 9, and 10. Different capacities, different functions. So right now, the new kids that are coming in, Nostradamus called them the children of the divide. And what he said, and we're seeing it, is they are highly sensitive. And if you look at kids that are on the spectrum now, and more kids than ever are on the spectrum, look at how sensitive they are to noise, to external conflict, to being touched, to different things. Why? Because they're functioning at a different level of consciousness than generations prior to them. Why? At some level, they remember. They remember who they are. And if you look at the younger generation, starting with my nieces and nephews, now all of them are anywhere from about 27 to about 35 years old. And every single one of them, even though they've got good educations, a couple of them went to Harvard, 2 Fulbright scholars and all this, none of my nieces and nephews were about money and external success. They weren't about power and achievement and fame. They were all about where many kids are today, because they literally are the crystallines. They're all about service. Again, what Nostradamus called the children of the divide. Now, the old kids on one side of the divide are all about money and greed and ego and possessions. On the other side, the crystalline, they're all about impact and making a difference. Nostradamus also called these children the seeds of the second dawn. And that's what's coming right now, is another dawn in humanity. What we have to look at is we're in the middle of it. Gary Zukav and I were talking about it, and, he was saying, and we see it around us, the old world is failing. The banking systems are failing. The old political structures are failing. Why? Because they cannot literally sustain the frequencies of the higher frequencies coming to the planet. Many people are panicking at what's going on in the world. That's low frequency. That's not where you want to be. And I think Gary called this in his terms was, we are all on trial by chaos. So all the chaos in the world, How are we going to manage it? Are we going to live in a fractured reality, or are we going to live in a peaceful reality? It's time to wake up, okay? It's time for all of us to break the illusions of the old world and wake up into the new world, the awakened world. It's time to literally connect with higher mind, higher field. It's time to speak out. It's time to stand up, and it's time to let the higher frequencies and truth and knowing of who you are come through you. Why? Because the planet's changing very quickly, and you have to decide what team you're going to play on. The sleepwalkers, or those that are waking up, and the truth seekers and those that are evolving. If you want to argue, that's great, but I don't know how you can argue with the changes that are happening on the planet. The transformational takeaway is that it's not coming. We are in it, and what we are in is epic. It is epic. And because many of us look, we don't see what's coming. And what matters more than anything else, as Don Juan said, to make yourself immune to all of the negative things happening on the planet, to make yourself immune, raise your frequency. And remember, we go from thoughts to feelings to vibration to frequency. Thoughts, feelings, vibration, frequency. Meaning, raise your thoughts, you'll raise your feelings. Raise your feelings, you'll raise your vibration. Raise your vibration, you'll raise your frequency. Let me put it simply. Fucking stay in your happy place. How about that? Stay in your happy place. I'm going to talk more about this, and I'm going to share a little bit deeper insight over on the Secret Podcast. If you'd like to hear that, go to jimfortin.com/insiders. jimfortin.com/insiders. I do coaching in there twice per month. It gives you the opportunity to interact with me and ask any question you might have about these podcast topics. Either way, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.